आजादी चाहिए तो उसकी कीमत खून दे के चुकानी होगी। तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा।
आईएनए की बागी फौजियों पर अंग्रेज देशद्रोह का मुकदमा चलाएंगे।
उन तीनों के बचने के चांसेस कम हैं।
This trial and its judgment will be remembered.
With the end of Turkic slave Mamluk dynasty and Turko-Afghan origin tribe called Khiljis annexed the rule to Delhi Sultanate. Their rule to Delhi Sultanate was highly aided by cracks and decline in the former empire. However, Jalaluddin Feroz Khilji I of the Khilji empires chose not to rule from Mehrauli. Rather, he moved further down to establish his capital in a new city called Kilokri.
The city's foundation was laid by Balban's grandson Kekubad. What could have been his palace in those days, Kilokri or Kilugadi as it was also called, has now transformed into a very busy locality of southeastern Delhi, opposite what was once a broadside course of the river Yamuna.
Well, Kilokri was the second imperial city built in the neighborhood of Qutub Delhi in the 13th century by Kekubad, the last of the Turkish sultans, early Turkish sultans. It was built on the bank of the river Yamuna in an area which today extends from Maharani Bagh to Jangpura, roughly. And we know that there was some kind of a military use of the land or military encampment near Kilokri. Kilokri later became a fully fledged city, but in Balban's period there was some kind of or even before, he also built a settlement called Riaspur, which is where the modern Nizamuddin's tomb is.
Jalaluddin Khilji, when he was first assumed the throne, he was actually crowned at Kilokri, and he ruled from there for at least a year before he came back to what was Lal Kot. So nothing much is left of Kilokri. It was actually called Kilugadi because it was built by Kekubad, who was the grandson of Balban and his successor. But Kilokri, the only thing that remains now is the name, which is the name of a small village, one of the urban villages of Delhi.
While the remnants of Khilji rule here may be very few and distant, the place was once a home to a rich township and an established market. Traders were brought from the Delhi of old and bazaars were established. The life went on and perhaps flourished even more in the new city. A sense of stability was slowly setting in Delhi's Sultanate, with Jalaluddin Khilji's court gaining strength.
We have a very lively description of the city in the writings of a 14th century history, Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi of Ziauddin Barni, and also a very lively account of celebrations held in Kilokri by Amir Khusro. So if we put these two major texts together, we have a picture of Kilokri as a thriving city. The nucleus of the city was a palace built by Kekubad for himself, where he came and held his court. Delhi continued to be the capital of the Sultanate because major offices, mint, secretariat were not really permanently shifted from Qutub Delhi, but it's fair to say that when the Sultan came and settled in Kilokri, his nobles also came and settled, merchants came, and that was how, so the impulse was political, which was very important in those days for a city to come into being. Gradually, of course, shops of different kinds, civilians, other people, working people, they all came and settled, and the city acquired the shape of a proper city.
Rich people of Delhi also came, and it was called the Naya Sheher, and people came and built their own palaces next to the river, and it must have been a very beautiful place at some point. Because it was inhabited for such a short while that maybe the stones were reused in later constructions, or the palaces and all were made of relatively perishable material like bricks and wood and all, and they have now gone. We really cannot say because there's very little information we have about it, what happened later.
Jalaluddin Khilji was already walking towards the evening of his life when he took over. Although the royal throne was still in Mehroli, Khilji decided to stay put here and rule from Kilokri. He was unable to come to the terms if the people of his kingdom will accept an usurper. So what he did? He decided to build on the palace left by his predecessor, Kekubad.
Several other buildings to house his princes, nobles and other officers were ordered to be built in Kilokri. In the words of 14th century political thinker Ziauddin Barni, accountant in Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi, the excellence of his character, his justice, generosity and devotion gradually removed the aversion of the people, and they accepted the new emperor and his new city.
This is the first time when we hear the phrase Old Delhi, Dehli-e Kohna, Dehli-e Buzurg, for Qutub Delhi, because there was a new city in Kilokri which began to be called Sheher-e-Nau, or New City, or if you like, New Delhi, to use a modern expression. So the moment a new city came up, this city began to be called Old. He realized that there were Turkish ruling classes in Qutub Delhi who were not favorable to his rule, and therefore he avoided ruling the Sultanate from what began to be called Old Delhi now, and he stayed in Kilokri. He started the second round of building construction in Kilokri, expanding Kekubad's palace, building gardens, building new houses, therefore providing another round of, if you like, political and administrative impulse to the city to expand.
6 years into his rule, Delhi was preparing to see another of a throne shaking. While city's parched land waited for the monsoon rains, the blood was spilling in the kingdom of Jalaluddin Khilji. On July 20, 1296, he was murdered by his nephew Juna Muhammad, who later came to be addressed as Alauddin. Seizing power, Alauddin assumed the title of Sultan-e-Dilli.
Well, the murder of the reigning Sultan, his uncle Jalaluddin Khilji, was soon forgotten. In the beginning it was a stigma, of course, and the Jalali nobles, who were afraid of Alauddin's ambition, truly afraid, then they were against him. But he bought them with the gold he brought from the south, he bribed them, he took a whole lot of measures to bring them to his fold, and as I said, he had a nobility of his choice. So frankly speaking, in the political circle, very soon his image as a regicide was forgotten.
Days after witnessing another palace intrigue and bloodlust for power, Delhi was decorated again to receive her new ruler. Alauddin Khilji entered the city in great pomp and with a large force, with a procession leading him to the throne. Before taking over the throne of Delhi, Alauddin began his military career as governor of Kara province, and from there he raided and plundered Malwa in the year 1292 and 2 years later in Devagiri.
Yes, Alauddin Khilji was arguably the most important ruler of the Delhi Sultanate before Muhammad Tughlaq. He ruled for not a very long period of time, 1296 to 1316, which is 20 years. But in these 20 years, a lot happened. He built a new capital in Siri, another city, which was a plain earlier. He built a city there, he built an imperial palace, which also held the secretariat of the state. And we know that Siri became a city almost of the same importance, commercial and political importance as Qutub Mehroli. If we disregard his earlier career as an invading prince, he was in these 20 years was able to not only consolidate the Khalji power in Delhi and in the Delhi Sultanate, but also take measures which had very long lasting implications. And he had an image, a self image of himself he considered to be the second Alexander or Alexander of the age, a term which he used in an inscription on the Alai Darwaza in the Qutub complex. In his coins also he called himself Sikandar-e-Sani or the second Alexander. So he had a grandiose image of himself as a powerful ruler.
Considered one of the most belligerent rulers in the history of Delhi Sultanate, who ventured southwards, launching attacks in Gujarat, Ranthambore, Mewar, Jhalore, Warangal, Mabar and Madurai. Among his most significant of campaigns, he successfully defended Delhi against many Mongol invasions.
There were many Mongol invasions. The Mongols were trying to capture India, and one major contribution of the Delhi Sultans to the politics of the period was to protect the Delhi Sultanate from the Mongol invasion. The history of India would have been very different with a Mongol ruler, but it's fair to say that Alauddin Khilji played a very major role. He fortified Old Delhi because the population of Delhi was exposed and people were crossing the river and coming and settling in Delhi, seeking refuge in Delhi. He fought a war, a very fateful war against Kutluk Khaja, which he won, and also ordered a string of forts to be built to guard the route from where invasion was taking place.
He just didn't stop at the defensive postures, leading ruthless attacks deep into Mongol territory in Kandahar, Ghazni and Kabul in Afghanistan. His forces ensured that Mongols never attacked his kingdom again.
In a move considered one of the most significant ones of his rules, Alauddin Khilji changed tax structures. He increased agriculture tax from 20% to 50% and stopped payments and commissions on the tax collected by the local chiefs. Tax collection and money control, all these things added to the treasury of Alauddin Khilji. Treasury which were attending to the needs of his growing army and its even growing military campaigns.
Alauddin also took a series of measures to consolidate his political power by bringing in people of his choice as officers of the state and getting rid of the older nobility, by introducing a new taxation system based on a measurement of land and conversion of tax share of the state into cash, minted coins, silver coins, particularly the silver tanka of Alauddin and his gold tanka were found later, much later in the Mughal period also. So the circulation of these coins was very very high. He also introduced a whole other set of measures to consolidate the political and fiscal power of the state and the ruling class at the center.
Large markets called Shahanai Mandi came up in his rule, catering to the needs of daily households to exquisite products. Muslim merchants were granted exclusive permits and monopoly in these markets. No other merchants could buy from farmers or sell in the markets. Those found violating these rules were severely punished.
Well, it is said, under Alauddin Khilji's rules, even walls had ears and eyes. His nobles were under constant scrutiny. Even the private households were not spared from an efficient network of spies. He banned socialization among officials, intermingling, and even banned marriages between the noble families. All that he wanted to make sure was there was not even an iota of opposition against him.
His rule is also remembered for massive spoils of the war, so much so that his commanders were asked to pay Male Ganimat, an Arabic term for tax on the loot in wars. One of his loot is still remembered, etched and ingrained in the times immemorial. After raiding Warangal, he sacked the ruler and looted one of the largest known diamonds in the human history, the Kohinoor. The precious stone which turned men into deep admirers weighed, according to one claim, 793 carats. The jewel worth many millions continued to change hands and adorn the crowns from Mughals to Shah of Iran to Ranjit Singh and to the British. The wheel of fortune kept bringing the fate of times on the rulers who possessed it. Whoso holds Kohinoor holds Delhi, runs a legend. The dazzling diamond, now weighing mere 105.6 carats today, shining brightest and mightiest on the crown of the Queen of England, forming a part of the crown jewels of United Kingdom.
Khilji's rule was known for harsh and sometimes questionable measures, but among the measures that was rather popular among public was that of prohibition, where drinkers, importers and smugglers of wine were subject to harsh punishment. That included jail terms for many days, months and even years.
The prominent court writer Ziauddin Burni noted,
"The Sultan himself entirely gave up wine parties. He directed his ministers to go out in each and every corner of the city, its bazaars, wards and sarais, and read out the royal farman that no one shall drink, sell or have anything to do with the wine."
By the turn of 14th century, attacks from Mongols grew, and with Delhi under increasing threat, Alauddin Khilji began building a new fort at Shahpurjat locality, west of Kilokri and north of Old City, Mehroli. The city, third of Delhi's, was named Siri.
Siri, actually the earliest references we hear about Siri are as a big plain, not the city itself. It was a big flat ground. It was the plain of Siri, and it really came into prominence because the armies of Alauddin Khilji here engaged with the Mongols. The Mongol invasions were a constant feature of Alauddin Khilji's reign. In fact, particularly the early part of his reign, the Mongols made several inroads into North India, and a couple of times they came, one time they came to the outskirts of Delhi, and the second time in 1303 they were at Delhi itself. They laid siege to the city of Delhi. And when you talk about the city of Delhi, you mean Mehroli, the Lal Kot city. But it was here that the armies of the emperor were encamped in the plain of Siri, and they kind of barricaded themselves and somehow managed to keep off the Mongols. And the Mongols, for various reasons, left after a couple of months. But it is said that then Alauddin Khilji woke up and decided that he really needed to do something to protect where the army was camped.
Within its high walls and imposing ramparts built with stones, quartzite, bricks and mortars, blockhouses and other structures were built to prevent the army from forcing a way in. It's said that the raiders from Central Asia could not penetrate the walls of Siri and had to retreat back.
After Alauddin Khilji moved his capital here, Siri was transformed into a flourishing town. Once known as the pride of a city, this fort housed Hazar Sultan, or a palace of 1,000 pillars, built with marbles and a beautiful stonework in Pietratura. The palace is said to have a huge, beautiful gate that took a breath away of its admirers. Today, only part of that fort, with its walls and ramparts, has stood with the test of times.
Shahpur Jat is now a crowded locality with its busy shopping halls and upmarket boutiques. Nestled in horse cars stands another monument of significance, a telling statement of his rule, Chor Minar. The pillar standing on a square of arches is believed to have stood out as a deterrent for thieves and thugs who attempted to venture in his kingdom.
What we have about Chor Minar is mostly legend and oral traditions. And it is said that this was built during the time of Alauddin Khilji at the just outside the walls of city. And the significance was that it was a tower where the heads of criminals who had been executed, those heads were displayed over there. You can see that it has these holes at the top of the minar, and these holes, each one of them would have held heads. So it was a huge deterrent that people entering the city would see outside this minar with those heads displayed, and they knew how what a strict ruler Alauddin Khilji was.
After establishing a new city, Alauddin built the first building in the history of India that employed Islamic architecture, Alai Darwaza. Housing in Mehrauli just behind Qutub Minar, a beautiful gateway with a dome and arches is extended by vista southwards, with trees on its both sides. Among his desires were to build a tower twice the height of Qutub Minar. He called it Alai Minar. The construction began on a site running parallel to majestic Qutub Minar. Due to his death, the construction was stopped midway, and as the fate will have it, none of his successors took up the unfinished job.
He wanted to leave his mark. He wanted to be a great ruler, and there are, one of those important parts of his rule was that he went and made inroads into Deccan, for instance. That was one major feature of his rule. He saw himself as a great conqueror, and great conquerors try to leave these monuments to their greatness. So Alai Darwaza, the expansion of the Qutub Mosque, was part of this plan. So the building of a new minar, which was never completed, the building of a grand gateway into and if you look at the inscriptions of that gateway, it refers to Alauddin Khilji in very hyperbolic terms as Sikandar-e-Sani, the second Alexander. He saw himself as a great conqueror.
Near his city Siri, the Emperor of Delhi also built a large water reservoir, Hauze Alai at Hoskhas, to provide the water supply at his kingdom in Siri. Just like Shahpur Jat, Hoskhas is now an abode of restaurants and shopping centre, glittering and beaming with the cosmopolitan character of the capital city of the world's largest democracy. Hauze Alai bore a major significance during the rule of Tughlaq, with Firoz Shah Tughlaq establishing a mosque and madrasa in the year 1352 and even designating a space for his tomb overlooking the huge water masonry. Ruling Delhi Sultanate and consolidating his power for 20 years, Alauddin Khilji died in January 1316. His legacy in rule is still remembered for control over nobility, agricultural reforms, taxation reforms, establishing of marketing reforms and price control mechanism, besides several battles and warfare.
So one has a mixed reaction when one recalls the rule of the Sultan as a stable regime, oppressive to the peasantry particularly, and the subordinate classes. But many people liked him also, because there was a prohibition against liquor consumption in Delhi and the neighborhood he was also remembered as a sultan in whose reign things were very cheap. So much later, in the 14th century, people recalled his reign with fondness by saying how cheap things were in his reign. And Nasiruddin Chiragh, who was a Chishti saint in Delhi, mentions that people of Delhi go to his grave and tie strings, dhaga bandhte hain, and seek blessing. So his image as a tyrant sultan, which we have today, was very different in after his death, when people almost took him to be a saint.
Alauddin Khilji's death was followed by a war of succession amongst his sons. In 1320, Qutbuddin Mubarak Shah Khilji, the last of Khiljis, was murdered by Khusro Khan. Incidentally, he was a member of a Khilji cabinet. But even Khusro Khan couldn't survive for long. 4 months later into the throne,